Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV is about Muslim, but Muslims are about peace, justice, fairness, and equity. You can always watch us on muslimnetwork.tv, but on Galaxy 19 satellite, Roku, as well as Amazon Fire TV. And we are all over in Facebook and YouTube as well. Peace is what world needs. But right now, America has forgotten about the world. We are worried about ourselves. Yes, we need peace as well. But our streets are saying no justice, no peace. So peace is critical. We are all praying for that. But without justice, what will be that peace like? So peace is needed, and peace is not possible without justice. And to discuss peace and justice today with us is no other than that who has mastered the art of interrupting people who don't stand by peace and sometimes neglect justice, if not all the time. And that is no one but a feminist peace leader movement, Madhya Benjamin. Welcome, Madhya.
Hello, so nice to be on with you.
Thank you so much. Madhya Benjamin is the co-founder of the women-led peace group called Code Pink. And she's always mentioned co-founders. So one of my questions is going to be, who are the other co-founders? She's author of 10 books. I don't know how she finds time to write books. I need to learn that from her, including Drone Warfare, Killing by Remote Control, and Kingdom of the Unjust Behind the US-Saudi Connection. Her most recent book is about Inside Iran, the real history and the politics of the Islamic Republic of Iran. She's part of a campaign to prevent a war with Iran and instead promote normal trade and diplomatic relations. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Madhya.
Fabulous. So nice to be on with you and discuss these issues.
You know, you have been with us on Radio Islam on WCV. So we have been there for 15, 18 years. Now Radio Islam is merged into Muslim Network TV. And so as we reestablish our connection with Madhya, Madhya is doing an amazing work. And she is, wherever you look for a issue, she's going to be there. For example, the major conference on drones, in which engineers, scientists, drone operators, peace activists all came together. I have never seen in the world anyone put together a major conference on drones, and it was Madhya who did that. So Madhya herself, I don't know how many members are in the Code Pink organization. I even don't know if it's a proper organization or just a broad coalition, but I see them all over in pink banners and pink dresses and pink this and that, and they're speaking up on critical issues which not many people will care for, critical issues which people will ignore, and she will take a risk. I mean, she loves peace. She loves to create a news by interrupting, and then she gets deported and she get banned. And this is something which continue to happens to her. She's Jewish person, and she got banned from Israel. And in that way, she continuously is up. She continuously we have a little bit of a problem. Just give me a moment, please. Our guest somehow has a camera problem. Okay, so while we rescue our guest, I will keep talking to you. Uh, so, so Madhya Benjamin continues to stand, if whether it's Palestinians or it's drone attacks in Pakistan, she speaks up and remains principled on that. So while we are waiting for her to come back, one of the things I like to remind you is that we cannot talk peace. We have to stand with peace. Peace, justice is something which is prophetic. It is not just my interpretation of it being prophetic, but God Almighty has told us in the Quran that God sent all the prophet. Muslim believe in Adam being prophet, and all the biblical prophets we believe in. They're mentioned in the Quran also, and there are prophets who are whose names are not known to us. Actually, Prophet Muhammad, peace upon, says that there are more than 125,000 prophets around the world. So, what were the purpose of these prophets? What we are told, and it is in the Quran, that the purpose God tells us in the Quran that He sends prophet after prophet for one purpose. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. So help people stand up and establish peace, justice, fairness, and equity. Four words, right? But all those four words are in the Arabic word al-qist. Uh, and that if you pick up the dictionary, that's what you will get. So that was the prophetic job. And Muslim continue to commit to it. Anytime we say, Ashhadu Allah ilaha illallah, I bear witness there is no God but one God, you're recommitting yourself to that mission. And that's why when Hajis goes, and pretty soon, I hope God Almighty will lift this misery of pandemic from us. Hajis will start going there. And when Hajis go over there, they do two things. One of the things they do is they stand in the Mount of Arafat. Mount of Arafat is where the Prophet delivered his last sermon. In the last sermon, he says, especially warned people about the women and women's right. Another thing in that sermon, he says that there is no superiority of one people over the other. He says exactly Arabs have no superiority on non-Arabs, non-Arabs have no superiority over Arabs. He said white have no superiority over black, and black has no superiority over white. And with that statement, he says that the only difference between individuals is their character of God consciousness, character of piety, not the color of his skin and the race and all of that. So, at this moment, as we are surrounded with a peace and justice movement, it is important to connect the dot. We are all connected. Intersectionality is important. This morning, Supreme Court rejected Trump administration's effort to stop DACA. This is dreamers who could not, who parents brought children to America, and they know no country except America. So there was a program called DACA that they can stay in America if they fulfill. So there are about 700,000 of those, and Supreme Court reinstated. I was reading the statement issued by some of the leaders of the DACA movement. There are kids who grew up in America now in their early 20s. And they say, well, this is a small victory. But as long as anti Blackness remains, as long as poor people struggle remain, we will continue to struggle. That's the beauty of intersectionality. And that's the thing which defines Samadhiya Benjamin. You could find her in Pakistan against drone. You can find her in Yemen against Saudi's invasion. You can find her in Israel in support of the Palestinian rights. And you can find her back on Muslim Network TV. Was it your test that how long can I talk without you?
Sorry about that. Good to be back on.
All right. So here we are with Madhya Benjamin, and maybe you can adjust your screen a little bit to be a little closer and little at that level. But Madhya, you do all these things. What makes you a peace activist who doesn't know how to slow down?
Well, I think like you, I look at what's happening in the world and realize that we have to be a part of this, not just bystanders. And when I do get a chance to travel in times that are not coronavirus times, it is so clear to me that my government is oftentimes so involved in a lot of these problems in the world. And that gives us an extra responsibility as Americans to do more to change our government policies. And I feel that particularly when you look at the Middle East, and now I've been doing more work around Latin America as well, um, it is so evident that the US foreign policy has had such a negative impact on people there and destroyed so many lives. And unfortunately, our media doesn't tend to cover what the US is doing. So it's very hard to build up the
Well, so she Madhya was talking about U.S. foreign policy, how U.S. foreign policy it connected with problems abroad, and that is true. Cruelty at home is connected with cruelty abroad. And on this show of Mujahid Talks and Muslim Network TV, we have discussed this over and over again that how these things happen. For example, uh, when we were talking about the participation of America by providing arms to Saudi Arabia, which are used on Yemen, arms to Israel, which are used on Palestinians. Actually, someone has a photo of ISIS fighters in Syria or Iraq. I forgot which one. And they took that photo of arms they were carrying, and they connected each arms to United States manufacturers of guns, also the people in the Western Hemisphere who are producing those guns. Isn't this amazing that we're fighting the people who are using our guns? Who sold them guns? Who manufactures those guns? And it could increase. I mean, if we're not against the nuclear warfare and we're not stopping those weapons, one of these days somebody will figure it out. It was a extremist, right-wing extremist, a supremacist in New England, who was a wife abuser. So his wife murdered him. Only then the world found out that he has purchased through mail order different components in the United States, some nuclear material, some of the switches, and this and that to create a dirty nuclear bomb. And it was, I'm not making it up. Unfortunately, not America doesn't issue these things, but it was on Time magazine that he came the closest person to make a dirty bomb. If he could do that, what about him be connecting to some extremist in the world and they using? So, in principle, this whole nuclear technology is harmful for humanity. So, speaking against that, who will do that? America is the place where we have freedom to speak up. That freedom need to be used very thoroughly. So we are able to have an impact. So this is Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. And I hope our guest Madhya Benjamin of Code Pink will come back. I don't think this is Code Billu, which is keeping her out, but we'll be right back after these messages.
are in one of those moments that demand a poor people's campaign.
Our brothers and sisters are sleeping on the streets. For a country this rich to have so many people poor, it's immoral and it's wrong.
Until we are ready to keep this fight going.
Because it's crucial that we make ourselves heard.
Our backs are against the wall, and we got no choice but to push.
We can do more. We can do better. And we're building the power.
And so we have to come to a point that every attack on the poor will embolden our agitation.
Rise up. Rise up. Rise up and join us June 20, 2020.
This land is your land. This land is my land. This land is our land. And together, from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Code Pink's leader, Madhia Benjamin. Well, I'm trying to talk to her, and Code Blue keep interrupting the whole thing. Tell me, Madhia, who are the other co-founder of Code Pink? We never hear from them and never see them.
Well, the other co-founder is Jody Evans. She lives in Los Angeles, which is the main office for Code Pink. And she's very well known on the West Coast for all the work that she has done for many years for peace. And she is the one who organized an Iraq tribunal that looked back at the history and the consequences of the US invasion of Iraq. She's very involved in the movement that we have called Divest from the War Economy, where we try to get schools, universities, cities, pension funds to take their money out of the weapons industry. And that's a particularly exciting program right now when the protesters out on the street are calling for defunding the police. We are looking at all the money that we spend on the military. And so that is the program that Jody Evans, the co-founder, is running from Los Angeles.
Okay, so is this a membership organization? What? Tell us, give us some size of it, because you loom larger than the Code Pink. So we think you're the Code Pink. That's it.
Well, we actually have. I don't know. We don't charge a membership fee, but people who are on our mailing list, we have about 100,000. We send alerts out every single week. Your viewers can reach us at codepink.org. And every week we give people something that they can do that moves us a little closer towards the world we want to live in. And then we also do have some chapters. We used to have a lot of chapters during the Iraq War when there was more interest in these issues. These days we have fewer chapters, but they're still quite active. And one of the things that the chapters are doing is what I just mentioned to you. They go to their cities and they get their cities to say, we will divest from the war industry. And they're active around pushing their members of Congress on many different issues, oftentimes these days related to the brutal sanctions that the US is imposing on countries like Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, a new round of sanctions that just went into effect on Syria, that the US government says is designed to punish governments, but it really punishes the ordinary civilians and leads to a lot of unnecessary deaths. So those are the kind of things that our chapters and our members do.
Okay. So somewhere I read you describing yourself as a nice, quote, nice Jewish girl, unquote. But then your group was banned from entering Israel. So you don't seem to be that nice of a Jewish girl. Can you describe your journey to in peace movement vis-a-vis a difficult issue, being a Jewish and criticizing Israel, standing up for the Palestinian rights?
Sure. I started my activism when I was in high school during the Vietnam War, recognizing that what the US was doing there was awful. And over the years, I continued to work around peace issues like the US involvement in the wars in Central America during the 1980s. But there was one issue I always tried to stay far away from, and that was the issue of Israel and Palestine. Coming from a Jewish family, having lived on a kibbutz when I was 16 years old, I had a very skewed view of what Israel was all about. And it took me quite a while and Palestinian friends, as well as going back to Israel and looking for myself to understand just how repressive the Israeli state was. And when I took the blinders off and realized that my religion was being used for this state of Israel, that my tax dollars were going to support the military repression of people in the West Bank and Gaza, I started getting very involved. In fact, started organizing trips to Palestine, including trips to Gaza, which was very, very difficult to do. We had to go through Egypt during the days of Mubarak when we could actually get in. And then more recently, working on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement that has been called by Palestinian civil society. And very recently, we just organized a letter to Joe Biden looking at his position and saying, if you want to reflect the change in attitude of the American people, and particularly the Jewish community in the United States that is more and more supportive of Palestinian rights, you must change your policies. And we have over 100 groups that have just signed on to that letter that will be that went today to Joe Biden's campaign.
So while doing that, you might have some pushback from the loved one in the Jewish community, because it's a community with a historic, with a history of a struggle. How are you able to deal with that?
Within the Jewish community, there is really a tremendous division. There is the pro-Israel government group called AIPAC, which is a very large lobby group in the United States. But then there are alternatives that have been springing up and getting very strong. One of them is a more middle of the road group called J Street, and another is a much more progressive group called Jewish Voice for Peace that now has chapters all over the United States and is very involved in trying to change the congressional policies towards Israel. And we are supportive of the efforts of Jewish Voice for Peace. There's also a very active, exciting young group of Jewish Americans called If Not Now. And they've become very involved in this issue, and they take direct action, nonviolent direct action, that is very exciting to see. So there has been a shift, not only in public opinion, but there is much more activity among the Jewish community to change the US policy to stop supporting what we call the apartheid regime in Israel.
Tell me this. I mean, among all the peace movements you have been involved, and there are, so many of those. And I was, of course, not here when the Vietnam War was going on, and I didn't realize that you're old enough to be part of that. But in my presence here, United for Peace and Justice was a major movement in anti-Iraq. And there were tens of thousands of people involved, a whole lot of people were marching. So in last 40 years, I have not seen any movement as strong as that United for Peace and Justice. What happened? Why peace movement continues to wither away? and then have to regroup on something? Why we cannot become a force?
It's a good question, and I think there's a multifaceted answer. One was that Barack Obama was elected, and many people in the peace movement were part of the Democratic Party, felt it was a historic moment to get the first Black president and didn't want to protest him, thought perhaps he would get us out of the wars. The other is that in 2008, the financial crisis hit, so a lot of people in the peace movement were affected personally and started working on those issues, including getting involved in what was called the Occupy movement. And then let's face it, these issues go out of style. They become background noise. The fact that we've been in Afghanistan and Iraq for almost 2 decades now means that for the younger generation, they've grown up knowing only the US at war. So it doesn't seem like anything new. It doesn't seem like anything that they can change. So these are some of the reasons. And I think it's become very difficult now to get a new generation involved. It's become very difficult to get people out on the streets. But that doesn't mean we don't have public opinion on our side. We do. It's one of the reasons, perhaps, that the Trump administration hasn't gone to war with Iran or with Venezuela. Certainly when Donald Trump was campaigning, he positioned himself as somebody who would get us out of these wars. The majority of Americans do not think it is in our benefit to keep US troops throughout the Middle East. And the majority of Americans don't want to see us getting into any more wars. So while we might not be able to get people out on the streets, we do have public opinion in our favor.
Well, if public opinion is in favor, and if streets in America are calling for justice and calling for equitable distribution of our wealth as poor people's movement, which is building up for June 20th rally, a digital rally. What happened to the good old word, which was so hot for a while, intersectionality? I mean, you got young people leading the streets right now. You have young people at the forefront of the climate change movement. Why the issues of foreign policy, the issues of war and drones have to be just assigned to Medea Benjamin?
Well, it's a great question. In some ways, they're not. You look at the Poor People's Campaign, and one of the key pillars going back to the time of Martin Luther King was to fight against racism, poverty, and militarism. And Reverend Barber, who has taken up the mantle today, puts militarism very much in the forefront. If you look at the manifestos of Black Lives Matter, the Movement for Black Lives, you will see a call for demilitarizing, and there's very much solidarity, for example, with Palestine. The problem is really, what are we up against? We are up against a huge military industrial complex that is very hard to grab hold of and change. We are up against a Congress and a White House, whether it's a Democrat or Republican in the White House, that is very much involved in this military industrial complex. Look at how the weapons industry is so clever that they design their weapons in every single congressional district. So it becomes an issue about jobs. So you have a strong union like the machinists union that want to continue rolling out tanks that the world doesn't need, making F-35s that the world doesn't need. And then you see that these weapons makers put money back into the coffers of the Congress people, both Democrat and Republican. And so you have that vicious cycle and the circle that keeps us in these wars. And not only in the wars, it keeps looking for new enemies. So right now, as the writing is on the wall for the US to wind down its wars in the Middle East, this same complex is drumming up the fear of China. And the Democrats and Republicans play right into that and are gearing up the United States to see China as the enemy, which justifies a massive buildup in our Pentagon budget. So
One of the things, Madhya, you mentioned, sorry for interruption, but you're the master of interruption, not for the presidents of this country and for our system. So, pardon me. One of the things which you mentioned of the labor unions, some of the labor unions being part of supporting that complex. Could you do a little more on that? Because labor movement by and large are considered progressive, which are responding to the call against racism and militarism and for justice. What are these components?
well, just as we see around justice at home, the police unions are very reactionary. They're very involved in giving money to politicians, and they try to stop any change in legislation. The same is true on the international level with some of the unions, like the machinists. They have hundreds of thousands of members that are involved in the manufacture of weapons, and they make large salaries. It's very hard to find good manufacturing jobs in the United States these days, as you well know, especially in the Midwest. But the factories that are humming are the ones that make these weapons. And so, unfortunately, it becomes an issue of the Pentagon gives a lot of money to the weapons manufacturers. They can pay good salaries to the workers, and then they want to keep those factories going.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with the peace leader of Code Pink, Madhya Benjamin. And you're watching Muslim Network TV, which is on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Roku and Amazon Fire TV and many other digital media. We'll be right back after these messages.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilize thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to $210 million. Two of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, A Slow-Burning Genocide on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tell of Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand With Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast From China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
We are the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
On June 20th, we will rise together for the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital justice gathering.
On June 20th, we will come together to lift the voices and faces of poverty in the midst of pandemic.
Rise with us. Visit June2020.org.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with our leader, CodePix co-founder, Madhya Benjamin. Madhya, one thing which you have done, I mean, normally you are on your own, disrupting President Bush and disrupting President Obama, and making sure that he rhymes with you for a second or so, and then we are trying to disrupt Trump. How you become such a master of disruption?
Well, I try to go to the places where people who are creating the problems are. You might have heard of the more notable ones like US presidents, but I try to go to the think tanks in Washington, D.C., where US politicians are talking, or people who are not politicians, but are influential in making policy, and question them directly about the results of their policies, or sometimes just walking onto the stage and calmly taking the mic and starting to speak. Because I think that's one of the most effective ways, because millions of people are oftentimes watching those programs. And while we tend to not have access to a lot of mainstream media, that is one place where we can have access to people who normally don't hear our voices. So that's why I think those kinds of interruptions are important to do.
So while you do that, I mean, we hear your voice and the contribution, But one thing very unique, which I thought you have done, I haven't seen many of the same thing done by you or many other peace activists and peace leaders, and that was on drone. You brought a you brought scientists and engineer and probably drone operators, political scientists and peace activists, and organized a conference. Not only you wrote a book on that, but you organized a conference. So you created a conversation on such an important issue. That Madhya Panchaman, I like to see a little more of that.
Well, we're constantly doing that. We did one on Saudi Arabia. We did one on Iran. I tend to, when I'm researching something and writing a book, then organize a gathering on those issues. So we better make sure that you're on our list to be invited to these. And hopefully, when we can start our meetings back in person, we'll be organizing something looking at the war at home and the war abroad, and bringing people together to make those very key connections. So as you say, the intersectionality that has to include the overseas wars can be brought into the very vibrant movement that we're seeing now to stop the repression at home against the Black community, the brown community, the immigrant community. So yes, we will be doing more of those.
So, so while you're there about intersectionality of these issues, of course, on drone or Iran, that's a particular subject on relevant people came together. But what about a peace movement summit in which not only peace movement leaders are there who work on the foreign wars, but also war at home on our streets? So Black Lives Matter, if they have a good platform and there are common points with people who are working on other issues abroad. I mean, I particularly focus on issues of genocide around the world. So people coming together and deliberating to develop some type of maybe not organizational unity, but some type of synchronizing our strategy. So we have slightly stronger voice, and the Democrats who take the peace movement for granted, at least there is some serious impact on their policies and platform. So what is the possibility of a conference which brings these people together on a common cause?
I think it's fabulous. And maybe this show will be a historic one, because I would love to work with you on that. And I think the time is ripe, especially when the Secretary General of the United Nations came out with that beautiful call for a global ceasefire that has been unfortunately ignored by most of the world. We need to show, as you were saying, a strong and broad coalition in the United States echoing that call of the Secretary General. So I would love to work with you on that.
Now, well, that's a good one. I mean, I was thinking I'm giving you the assignment. You threw the ball back in my court, but let's talk about it. One of the things which, when we think of Black liberation movement, I mean, it's starting from fight against the slavery, rebellions against the slavery, and then Black liberation movement, and now Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement. It always looks a very big thing of federal change, and they're talking about some laws, state. But there is a group of younger Black people, not the old big politicians, and they have something called 8 Can't Wait. They say that if these 8 things are adopted, which doesn't require a federal or state legislation. And it has things like banning chokehold and strangler hold, requiring de-escalation, requiring warning before shooting. And they got 8 points. And they think these points can reduce 70-75% of all murder. Of course, so killing one person is like killing a humanity, as we believe. But what do you think? I think the can peace movement issue solidarity with these smaller points?
Yes, I think so. And I think any platform that says we're not going to wait for things to happen on the federal level, although it is exciting that there is such a big push now on the federal level, we see communities taking this into their own hands. And there are already so many cities that have passed their own laws saying they can't use these chokeholds. They have to, even communities that have said you can't use tear gas and other kinds of military grade repressive equipment against American citizens. I mean, this is great, but then is it okay to use these on citizens of other countries? So yes, that's why we have to ask these same questions. When the military came out on the streets of the US in full force just a few weeks ago, I heard a lot of people say, we don't want these tanks in our street. We don't want these ninja looking soldiers here. They should go back to wherever they were. Well, why should they go back to terrifying people in Iraq or Afghanistan? So you're totally right. We need to connect these movements and say that innocent people around the world should never be terrorized by police forces or by military.
Do you have any insight in why the tear gas, which I heard is banned in international warfare, is allowed on our streets?
Well, it's not banned in international warfare. I know that things like landmines are banned, but tear gas is used constantly. I mean, look at how it's used in Palestine all the time. It's used. I was in Bahrain. They were shooting tear gas into people's homes. So there are still U.S. companies that are producing tear gas, although there is a lot of pressure on those companies to stop doing that. But there unfortunately is a lot of tear gas being manufactured around the world and being used on civilian populations.
What is the connection between these, military equipment and military grade stuff, which is getting in the hand of U.S. police in the cities?
Well, this is a program called the 1033 program that the Pentagon then encourages local police departments to apply for, quote, free surplus Pentagon gear that is then given to those police departments. And so you see small police departments around this country that have tanks, that have assault weapons, that have grenades, that have this tear gas, that have all of this equipment that the US military uses overseas and is now put into the hands of police departments. So this is a time when people are saying, why is this happening? And there has been an effort for years now, since the time of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, to ban this program, but it hasn't gotten enough support in Congress. And now it has received more support. So we're hoping that this might be the moment that we can get rid of this 1033 program and stop the Pentagon from equipping local police departments with warlike machinery.
One of the difficult things which I find in interacting with the peace movement and peace movement activists is the following. For example, I have hundreds of people I know, and many of them I have heard their personal stories, how they are oppressed by Assad regime. And these are not people who are, born yesterday. I came to know them today. They are neighbors, and they have stories, personal stories of oppression by the Assad regime. And while we are against war and U.S. adventurism in the foreign policies, We don't see peace movement similarly critical of oppressive policies of those regimes whom we don't want to be bombed and don't want to be attacked by the United States. At one moment, at the United National Anti-War Coalition, there were a lot of Muslim participating. They withered away. They felt that, peace movement only speaks up when these leftist or communist or pro-communist regime are under pressure. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's a valid criticism. We actually just had a gathering of some women to talk about the effects of sanctions on their country. And one of them was an Iraqi woman who brought up this very issue, saying how difficult it was for her to work with the anti-war movement because they refused to criticize Saddam Hussein. And we are seeing that same kind of thing around Iran, where people are saying, why aren't you speaking out more against the repressive actions of the Iranian government, and on and on. And I think the answer is, one, we should recognize the repressive nature of many of the regimes that the US is attacking, but we recognize also that our responsibility is to stop US intervention, because whether it's military intervention or economic intervention, it only makes the situation worse. We are close to many women's groups in Iran who tell us that whenever the US cracks down, it is the hardliners in Iran who get the upper hand, who then crack down on civil society. So our job is to really allow countries to evolve and to change their own leadership, because when the US gets involved, it never comes out good.
So the same thing now, dilemma is faced vis-a-vis China. I mean, China, as you know, and I know a lot of individuals. One of my staff person is Uyghur from the historic land in which is now under China. She showed me a list of 90 relatives who are lost in the Chinese, what they call them, re-education camp, which is sort of, I had one person applying for a job in my organization. And when I started interviewing and he realizes that I'm a Muslim, he looked Chinese. He disclosed that he is a Muslim also. And then he didn't want to have our job. And reason being that my family last Ramadan could not fast and they were invaded their homes. And my father doesn't want to be associated with a job with a Muslim organization. So the repression of religious communities in China is well known and well established, and China does not deny, although they say it's a re-education campaign. Now, at the same time, I'm aware as a peace movement supporter and activist that what build-up America is doing in the South China Sea. And as you mentioned, that the whole military-industrial complex is now have the China bogey up, so they continue the production of the militarization and equipment and things like that. How a person like me, who is essentially a human rights activist, along with being a peace movement activist, deal with this, that I like to preserve my capacity to thoroughly criticize and pressure China, while at the same time, I like to oppose recreation of another Cold War in the world?
It's a very difficult fine line to walk, but I think you do it, which is to say a war with China would be devastating for everyone, including the Uyghur population, and certainly for the US that needs to be focusing on how do we heal our own wounds and build up our society in a more just way, which necessitates taking money out of the military and putting it into things like healthcare and the environment. And in terms of China, we have to recognize that US pressure is only going to make China crack down more, that these are issues that have to be resolved internally. Yes, we can work with human rights organizations, but in the end, we must be very clear that making China our enemy is not going to help resolve the situation. The most important thing is to be able to work in a global community cooperatively with other countries, some of whom we will not like and some of whom we like, but to give the support to local people to try to change their own situations, not give the support to our governments to be menacing countries with military invasions.
Well, thank you so much, Madhya Benjamin, with all the wisdom which you bring and all the strength. I wish we have the technology to clone people properly. I like to have many of your clones.
Well, I would like to have yours, but it was wonderful being on this with you because now we have a big project ahead of us to work together on this peace convening.
All right. You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I was talking with Madhya Benjamin, who's leader of peace movement around the world, goes everywhere, stands up everywhere, and speaks the truth without any compromise. You can always watch us on Galaxy 19 satellite, and we're always 24/7 on muslimnetwork.tv, Roku, and Amazon Fire, and many other digital media. And thank you to our intern producer, Sumaya Heather, and our producer, Zahra Nadeem. And I see a couple of other interns are also today helping us. Thank you all so much. Peace. Salam.
Salam.